You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by...
Chrissy Mancini-Nichols.
Hey, Chrissy.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How are things in your neighborhood?
Going well. We're just saying no more pot banging, but
Yeah.
it's going well.
That's good. Any planning adventures that you've had lately? Or transportation adventures?
Transportation adventures. Well, I'm excited to get back on transportation.
Yeah.
Other than my 2 feet and bike. Yeah, I noticed that the buses are getting a little fuller in my neighborhood. So
Yeah, we went to go visit my parents. This weekend, my dad's birthday, and we took Bart. We've been taking Bart kind of over there to go visit my grandmother for the last few weeks. So I'm finally starting to get back to my normal, routine of sorts. But yeah, the Bart has been getting fuller and fuller each week we go. So I think that slowly people are coming back. Not quite the same as it was, obviously. I think highest ridership day was like 100,000 out of the usual 600, but it's starting to get there a little bit.
and once they bring back more service but yeah, it's just exciting to see people back on transit, and some of the agencies I'm working with, their ridership's coming back too. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah, it's great.
Nice.
How about you?
How about me? Any planning adventure? Well, my planning adventures happen all on this desk, basically.
True.
Usually. Most of it is podcasting and news, and then there's so much stuff going on, but then I think it's starting to wane a little bit because of summer vacation for a lot of people going on vacation with kids and stuff. So I noticed that there were a lot more out of office replies in the inbox this morning after I sent out the newsletter. So I think maybe that's part of the reason why I got maybe 50 today instead of the usual like 2 or 3.
Well, especially over the past year, there was no out of office ever.
Right. Or, people might take like a little break by themselves, but usually there's, it's like, I'm taking a week off for my mental sanity. And now I think it's just like, I'm out of the office. So that's good. Well, speaking of in the office, this is Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. I guess soon we won't be shut-ins, because we'll be able to go out. We're able to go out now. I mean, we're saying we've been out to bars and restaurants and stuff. So maybe I'll retire that at some point.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll be back in person in the studio.
In the studio, yeah. We'd love to have folks come over. This is episode 91. But before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that you can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks to folks who subscribe through podcatchers. It's great that you guys keep coming back week after week. We really do appreciate it. So we're going to go through some news. I'm going to start with the shortened kind of pieces of news, and then we're going to get into the topic of the general infrastructure because there's so many pieces and parts to it. But we're going to go through a couple of things ahead of that, and then we'll get to the kind of the big topic area in a second. The first topic that came up in the last couple of weeks was the electric vehicle weight problem. So electric vehicles are heavier than their gas-powered counterparts because of the weight of their batteries. The new electric Hummer, for example, weighs 3 times a Honda Civic, and that extra weight could mean greater potential for death when people walking or biking are hit by drivers. It also means more road wear and tear, which could lead to new road design issues and maintenance concerns. This was by Peter Valdez da Pina in CNN. What did you think about the weight of vehicles? I hadn't actually thought about it before.
Well, I think it's something that plays into the discussion we'll have on the infrastructure bill. But it's also, I'm working on several electric vehicle transit pilots, and one's a microtransit pilot where we're using a Chevy Bolt. And in doing outreach with the community, and talking about, well, what is the number one barrier for people to purchase electric vehicles, it's always vehicle range. They're concerned that they're not going to be able to, they're going to run out of juice. And to do that, you need bigger batteries to get better range. But the other issue is, and I don't know the answer to this, but our cars have been getting bigger over time. So that has its own safety implications. But then when you think about like, what are the cars that people are buying? Those are the cars that manufacturers are going to prioritize for going to electric, like the Ford F-150, which is, I think there's like a backlog of tens of thousands of people that want this big truck. It's only going to mean bigger cars, bigger batteries as they move to electric. And those are the cars that manufacturers are putting out because that's what the market is saying they want. When it was just the Prius and a Chevy Bolt, electric vehicles are still only 2-3%. They're very small margin of the cars on the road today. So I don't know how we get around that, where manufacturers are just going to continue to build bigger vehicles because that's what is selling.
I'm wondering if I didn't look this up or anything, but I'm wondering if insurance companies make you pay more for a larger vehicle. Is that something that you've heard of? I don't even know. I didn't look it up, but it was something that came to my mind. Like, why would you not incentivize smaller vehicles aside from maybe more death and destruction if you get hit by a larger one? But I'm just wondering if that's a way.
Well, I think insurance companies might look at it from the other end where the people in the vehicle are safer.
Right.
That I'm not sure. I know when we've had, like if I've had a smaller vehicle versus, I don't know that the insurance, I think they looked at it from the safety of the passenger.
Yeah. That's something that probably needs to get looked at, because then these vehicles will be worse for pedestrians and cyclists.
Yeah, and once they're autonomous, the implications there too.
Well, you'd think that the companies would want to own these vehicles, whether they're large conglomerates or whatever. If it's a fleet thing, that they'd want to reduce on their energy costs, so they'd probably try to reduce it. I mean, it's the same kind of problem with freight trains and passenger trains, right? The weight's gone up and up and up, and as the weight of the larger ones have gone up, the weight of the ones that the passenger vehicles have gone up too, which may, because of crumple zones and all that stuff, and it's actually made them heavier, and they've had problems with procurement because of that. And somewhere recently bought some trains that were too heavy because they were some passenger trains. I can't remember where it was, but it's something that parallels that as well, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I think the wear and tear on the road too. And we'll get into this, but how do we start charging electric vehicles, especially as they get heavier? Or it's not just electric personal vehicles; it's commercial vehicles, buses. In California, transit agencies by the year 2029, they're not allowed to buy any gas-powered vehicles. They have to be all electric.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an issue that if manufacturers are putting bigger vehicles out there, if our buses have to be electric, that's huge batteries. Who's going to pay for the wear and tear?
It's a good question. Who pays for it now?
No one.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Second up is the universal law of travel. A new paper by a team at MIT that looked at global travel patterns found that people visit destinations more often when they are proximate. The researchers are calling it the visitation law. So I've seen a bunch of comments about this on Twitter about this is like, duh, everybody knows that. But I also want to acknowledge that there's a benefit to kind of finding out that through a lot of data collection that this is actually true. And it's nice to be confirmed that this is not a duh, finding, but something that we can actually prove with numbers from 4 different continents.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a fair amount of research in my life, and sometimes you go into something and you know the answer, but you can't really plan for it unless you have data. I was more thinking about when I was reading, I thought duh, but I was also thinking about, well, what if you slice this by income, this data by income or property value? What does that look like? And I didn't get in see like the data tables.
Yeah, I didn't get into the data tables either, but we're actually So Thursday on Talking Headways, Alex Hoffman from the city of El Paso will be on the show, and he is working with Replica, which is we've talked about before. And he did slice the data by income level and location and things like that, and found that a lot of people will, go to the places where they're connected to by income. And I thought that was really fascinating. And it goes back to this Brown article that I've been talking about over the last few podcasts, and also I think a couple Monday shows, where they did research on saying that if it's not just housing segregation, it's destination segregation as well, because people are going to places. So this finding is interesting, but it also kind of goes up against another kind of finding, which is that people will go to the places where they feel like they're most welcome, or the places where they feel like they have access to, whether that's an ethnic grocery or things like that. So, the person that lives in a neighborhood might not want to go to the Whole Foods because it costs too much. So they're going to go to the next one over. So just saying that you have access to a grocery store isn't enough for a lot of people. So there's that tension as well. So I like that they found this basic law of visitation, but also there's all kinds of like little caveats and details that would probably need to be sorted out.
So in some of the curb management research that I'm working on is, we're looking at these hotspots. So the 15-minute neighborhood isn't part of the research, but, where can you access in 15 minutes? What are the hotspots? And, that's great. And people that live in those locations can walk or maybe take the bus quickly or even drive quickly. But it's also, what about the people that live half an hour, but they want to get to those destinations? What are the opportunities for them to do that? Is it we need to build bus lanes, more bike infrastructure, free transit, or lower fares transit? So I just think this whole thing about, that's why I wonder what it looks like by income or property value. So I'm excited about the upcoming show, because what about all the people that can't afford to live in the areas that there are lots of amenities near them where they can just walk to?
And they end up driving a lot more. They end up driving more,
and it's like it costs more, and yeah, exactly. Or if they don't have a car, what do they do? They just don't get to experience any of that.
Yeah. That's part of the problem, is that we design our systems around cars, but there's a huge population that doesn't have access to a car, which is a whole other problem when we're talking about designing. Also, you mentioned curb management. I was thinking, have we talked since you guys put out the APA article?
Oh, no, we haven't.
I totally forgot about that. There was you all had an APA article, which I was really fascinated that you put that together. It's really awesome.
Yeah, so that's the first in the series. It's a monthly series that we'll get into just a study I'm working on with some pilot cities. I was talking to one. I just brought another one on right before the show, and data collection, figuring out what's the right way to collect curb data, because it's really difficult using cameras or smartphones or in-vehicle data collection. There's a lot of companies that are out there saying they can, provide this data to cities and work in partnerships. So we're trying to figure out, vetting all these companies to see, what works, what can they promise that actually can be delivered, and then going on and collecting the data ourselves. We haven't written about this yet. It'll probably be in the, not in the July article, but the next one. We collected data using 16 cameras over a month in a small, 16 cameras, a small area. It's like 76 spaces along the curb. And we collected 13.2 million data points. So it's
a lot of data.
Because you just
spaces.
need 16 cameras. So it's 75 spaces, but you just need to collect this data by the minute. When you're looking at passenger pickup and drop off or commercial delivery, it's happening so fast. So yeah, it's a lot for cities to take in and figure out the whole process. So we'll be talking about that process and our findings and best practices and partnerships and technology and privatization and all these topics.
Man, that just made me think of like what the energy consumption is for like storing all that data, and it's almost like Bitcoin mining. You're looking for curbside,
No.
doubling your
Well-
carbon footprint.
We had to create a dashboard, which was a process. And
Sounds like it.
but yeah, we're learning a lot. But yeah, the series will get into all of these issues. But thanks for posting it in the newsletter.
No problem. Yeah, no, it was very popular too. Well, speaking of curbs and deliveries and those types of things, Amazon's dangerous delivery algorithm, Amazon's delivery stop grouping algorithm is putting drivers in danger. The goal of the GPS system is to have drivers stop as few times as possible to deliver the most packages on their shift, which they get paid a flat rate. But this cost-saving measure results in drivers running across perilous roads and highways, forcing workers to face injury or death to save Amazon money. And this was by Lauren Corey-Gurley at Motherboard. I just wanted to throw that one in there. I thought that was really interesting that there's no kind of designation in this algorithm for a street that might be 20 feet wide versus 60 feet wide, which obviously is a huge difference in safety.
Yeah, and I don't know, given Amazon's goal of, they're just trying to get as many packages delivered in a day, and they're working with contractors, unless they're going to prioritize safety. And how do you force them to do that? I don't know what the answer is. For our curb studies, when we're collecting data, we are collecting, what side of the street are certain vehicles delivering on? I mean, which way is the traffic moving? Which way do commercial delivery drivers move? We're finding some UPS drivers, like we all know, they park and they deliver a package. They pull up, they just keep double parking up and down the street. But I think there's lots of implications for the workforce. I mean, Amazon isn't a union, like UPS is unionized.
Mm-hmm.
They have some more protections, I think, than Amazon workers. But I mean, Amazon, they're hiring 3,000 people a day. Yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy. There must be some sort of a safety provision or something that can, some sort of digital protection from the Street Act or something. I don't know. I'm not big on too much legislation. I mean, you could over legislate everything, but it seems like this is a public safety. I mean, the other problem is that we don't necessarily, road engineering and traffic, engineering, we don't even worry about crosswalks and things for people generally, let alone a company. So that's a problem we have generally from street design. And maybe this is something that we need to have something specific detailed on, because it's not something that we do anyway. So there needs to be something specific about crossing major roads. But yeah, making people who are delivering packages take their lives into their own hands just to make, like I said, make Amazon a few extra bucks just doesn't seem worth it. But people continue to do it.
There will be coming out like a curb standard, sort of like the GTSF for the curb.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if that could play a role to provide, better app optimization for safety. I don't know. But when you think about it's only going to get worse. E-commerce from Q1 2020 to Q1 2021, there was like a 40% increase in e-commerce, and regular sales did go up, but only by just about 20%. That's only going to continue. So Amazon's just going to hire more people and have these same problems.
Right.
Like the article said, they have to deliver 50 pounds of dog food and carry it across the street. And
it's another issue to tackle. And then finally, on our articles list before we get into infrastructure, Big Oil had a bad day on May 26th. So Royal Dutch Petroleum, which most of you will know as Shell, was ordered by a Dutch court to reduce emissions by 45% in 9 years. Chevron shareholders voted 61% to cut emissions released when consumers buy and burn gas. And Exxon shareholders voted for 2 activist board members that would focus on climate change, even as the company, the least progressive in terms of climate, fought tooth and nail to keep it from happening. This Exxon fight was specifically interesting to me, just how the company ended up, the engine number one company, basically the activist investors got it to happen, which basically they talked to all the major index funds like Vanguard and those folks. And then they had folks from the Church of England and who I guess are invested in Exxon and California Teacher Pension Fund and all that. They basically this small little fund, which with only $250 million, which for fund sizes is actually fairly small compared to these billion-dollar funds out there, to get them to think about their bottom lines in the future, which if Exxon's not focused on climate change and the government flips on them, they're going to lose a lot of money, which means they lose their investors a lot of money, which is a danger for, going to hit people in the pocketbooks, which is how they got this to happen. But I'm just fascinated by this whole process of some small investment company, going up and talking, noise to Exxon and then getting something like that done. It's amazing.
And the company it just formed in December 2020.
Yeah.
But the head of the engine number one, he had a relationship with CalPERS from some prior work. So I think he was able to leverage that relationship because the California Pension Fund
it's a pretty large
is
fund.
like a pretty large investor in Exxon. But
yeah, it's crazy.
It's
and so the crazy part too is that this little kind of action, and it wasn't little in the sense that of what they got accomplished, but it was such a small company and their asset holdings are small. And then they convinced all of these larger groups to do this, to vote against Exxon in terms of activist board members. But then now lawyers are going to advise large companies on board fights. And then they say that these companies are going to have to make climate change, concessions in order to not have little companies like this push back on them, which I think is a huge change. So hopefully that means that more of these larger companies will be more climate forward rather than stick in the mud like Exxon was. Because I've heard that Chevron and Shell and British Petroleum and others, they're obviously going they're trying to look for other things to do aside from their oil extraction business.
Yeah, and Chevron they have a subsidiary that's investing in microgrid, providing financing for microgrids. I think the other companies have seen that they need to diversify, but ultimately the board, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And if they see that, like we said, Ford F-150 electric vehicles are, selling, and what do? It's just interesting how this little engine number one it could change how these boards or how these big companies focus, like you're saying. And
the little engine that could.
Yeah, really.
Literally. Okay, so that's it for the odds and ends, the news. But let's talk about infrastructure, American Jobs Plan, whatever you want to call it, thing. There's so many different moving parts. So I have a 7-part kind of explainer about what's been going on since we talked with Tracy last on Mondays. So to bring people up to speed since our last Monday show. On our last show, Tracy and I talked about the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee passing kind of a dud transportation bill that they called bipartisan, I think in order to get a shell out there, if I'm reading the situation correctly in my mind. It was panned by active transportation activists like T4 and NACTO. So since then, President Biden and Senator Capito of West Virginia called off talks on the big American Jobs Plan, which, by the way, American Jobs Plan is different from the Surface Transportation Bill. I know we said this last time, but we just have to make that clear. So as that mess ended, another group of 10 bipartisan senators picked up the talks and have settled on their own $1 billion plan that wouldn't hike taxes. We'll get into that rigmarole later. But then progressive senators stood up and said that they were going to cut out all the climate provisions from the bill and not actually have pay-fors, which means that they were probably going to do some PPPs or whatever else that actually provide no new money. It just makes the states pay more. And then after that, House Democrats on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee passed their own $547 billion surface transportation bill, Invest 2.0, that was praised by active transportation and progressive groups because it focuses on maintenance and reducing speed to reduce deaths and connect people with jobs and services and those types of things. And that bill specifically, they had over 200 amendments considered, and it got superheated because of the January 6th chasm between parties that is still very large and ferments a lot of back and forth. And then on the side, Bernie Sanders and some other progressive senators and lawmakers are saying, well, that stuff's going to go nowhere. So we're just building another bill ourselves so that when we get to reconciliation, we can go and do our own thing. So I know this is a mishmash of the American Jobs Plan, the Surface Transportation Bill, which are separate, as I said before, but these are all the little machinations that are happening in order to get to a place where we might actually get maybe maybe actually get an infrastructure package of a surface transportation bill, which is usually a 6-year bill, or a American Jobs Plan that would be, I think, 8 to 10 years. I think that's what it is. So I think I'm up to speed now with all
Or both.
the crazy stuff, or both, right? And an interesting thing that happened last time, and this isn't in the questions and comments, but I know that, for example, one of our Twitter commenters, Captain Transit, that's who it was. I mean, Captain Transit said that maybe we don't even need to have this. 6-year bill doesn't need to be a thing if we're just going to reauthorize freeways and highways and all that stuff. Maybe it doesn't need to be reauthorized. See what happens if it doesn't get reauthorized. I think that's a little bit above my typical reaction to these things, but a point nonetheless. What if it doesn't happen? So anyways, Chrissy, now that we know all of the kind of the timeline and what's going on, what are your general thoughts?
So the general thoughts, one, the INVEST Act, which is the reauthorization of the surface transportation bill, that's going through the House. It's going to be, it went through the committee, through TNI. It did get 2 Republican votes, right? And I think Speaker Pelosi said that it will be voted on before the July 4th recess. Everything in the INVEST Act sounds terrific. Mitch McConnell said it's dead in the Senate, and the Senate's process is, I think it will need to become more bipartisan because it needs 60 votes in the Senate, right?
Unless they do, unless they put it in the reconciliation. Can they do so that's another question. Can they do reconciliation with the?
They can do reconciliation with
the surface transportation bill.
So I don't think so. I think they need 60 for the surface transportation bill. So yeah, so I think maybe we'll get more. So I don't know where that will go. If they need 60 votes, everything that's in the INVEST Act, I mean, there's a lot in there on climate. I mean, really increasing money for transit and active transportation.
Well, I have a list of things here that I took from T4 that might be, because I know that people who listen to this podcast, at least, don't always like to just listen to the horse race stuff. So I wanted to put some things that were in it. So it requires states to produce a plan to maintain any proposed new capacity while making progress toward their state repair goals anytime they spend money from the biggest pot of highway funding. Under the House bill, the state departments of transportation and regional planning organizations would have to measure whether all people traveling can reach jobs, schools, grocery, medical care, and other necessities, so access. Further, states and MPOs would have to project the impact of their projects would have on access, and USDOT will review and publicly report their targets and progress. USDOT has to collect that data and make it available to help with the measurement of multimodal access, and there are requirements to analyze the accuracy of the models and update direction to states and MPOs on how to improve the process. The House has a $3 billion Reconnecting Neighborhoods program, which is the highway program that would reconnect neighborhoods. The bill addresses the entirety of the transportation program by establishing a new greenhouse gas performance measure and requires states to set positive targets to reduce emissions, and gives states the latitude to figure out their own preferred path to hitting those targets, but gives them targets nonetheless. The bill creates $5 billion a year program for high-speed and intercity rail. Invest 2.0 provides $21 billion for transit, increase over $13 billion program currently. And there's a new $100 million competitive grant program for transit agencies collaborating with state or local governments to increase bus frequency and ridership by redesigning urban streets to better move transit. And I think that was all the ones that I could take away from there. That's a lot of stuff. It's all the stuff we like. I didn't include everything. Obviously, it's a huge bill. But those are things that I thought were good to rethink and better than the Senate version out of EPW, because they're just like, hey, $200 and something million more for freeways. Let's just go with what we got.
Yeah, and Invest also provides 1,500 earmarks.
Yeah, that too.
so 5.7 billion for 1,500 earmark projects, which will help get it passed. So, and 20% of those earmarked projects are for active transportation. So 80% are for roads, but there is money in those earmarks for bike and ped, and that's something. Yeah, I think it's it's a bill we would all hope to pass and we would write. But again, I think there's these paths. So obviously you have to come over this hurdle in the Senate where Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema said they will not vote for anything that's not bipartisan. They're trying to forge this bipartisan agreement, but there's only 5 Republicans that have agreed to whatever their new American Jobs Plan is. I don't know who the other 5 that they'll get to vote yes, and if the minority leader says no to his members, I don't know who these other 5 are. So I think that's where they're trying to go on this 2-way path. Either they can pass the American Jobs Plan in a bipartisan way, and it's not going to include all the human infrastructure that Biden had talked about with parental leave and daycare funding and school funding and broadband. But then they can add that to a reconciliation bill. And I think that's what Bernie Sanders is working on too, which is why it seems that he's not so concerned about the bigger package, because he knows he can get the other stuff into reconciliation.
This is all really frustrating. I think it's just frustrating because the idea of bipartisanship is kind of bullshit generally.
Yeah.
Because if you have until the noise machine gets turned on that opposes everything, it seemed like it had a lot of, people that were looking positively at this from both sides of the aisle, whether or not their representatives were or not. And it's kind of frustrating that it's always going to be, rather than what's best for the people, it's going to be just power plays to see who can control what, and whether, Mitch McConnell's evil machinations. I mean, he is basically Emperor Palpatine in the way that he operates and the way he's kind of behind the scenes and trying to block everything and going. I mean, you might as well put a black cloak on his head and turn him gray, and he has a couple of times, and he's basically evil incarnate. But it's frustrating to see and to see all of this, wasted time as well. And I think the progressive groups are where I'm at, which is that we waste time through these bipartisan shenanigans. And if we could actually get to a bipartisan agreement, I would be all for that. If we could get to an agreement where people could agree on things, that would be great. But when you watch what happened with Biden and Capito, it just seemed like they were wasting everybody's time, because they were like, oh, you're gonna drop your plan $1 trillion, and we're gonna drop our plan, or maybe we'll increase $200 million, and you're gonna like it. And it's like, that's not how this all works. That's not how agreements work. That's not how compromise works. And the idea that they're basically saying no to all the funding sources that Biden threw on the table. I mean, I think everybody, a majority of people would be pretty happy if Amazon had to pay a 15% floor on taxes, because usually they get their accountants to get them out of all their taxes. And Amazon, Apple, whoever else, these companies that make billions of dollars and then stash it offshore, or they, have accounting tricks that allows them to write off everything and anything that they build or do to get to a zero sum for their tax bill. So, that's frustrating too, is that's actually, I mean, I thought that was a good, compromise, but they didn't take it. So here we are.
Yeah. And I think if you're President Biden, you are looking at polling that says Americans want some bipartisan effort. He ran on this fact that he could bring people together, whether we agree with that or not. That's what he ran on. And he has said he wants $1 trillion and, at least 600 million in new spending. And we don't know what's part of this compromise bill. We know the people that are leading it are all very moderate. No, not one of the senators that are on this 10 that are leading this compromise bill are from big states with big transit systems either.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's like New Hampshire, West Virginia,
Montana, Maine, Alaska, Ohio. Not places you think about when you think about, big dense cities at all. But if you're President Biden, you can go out. I mean, he only has so much time to get something done, and he wants to be able to deliver something. So if he can say, I got you $1 trillion, it's bipartisan, we got 600 million in new funding, I delivered. And then, I mean, does he keep progressives though? Does he keep progressives on his team, and will they vote for that? I mean, I think they would have to have some ironclad assurances that they could do the climate and the human infrastructure items in reconciliation. But that's a big risk that they would take to vote for this bill.
And that's the thing, is because the Gang of 10, which I'm going to call them the Gang of 10, the 5 Republicans, the 5 Democrats, those folks are just trying to strip out the climate stuff and make it, and this language of pure infrastructure or solid infrastructure or whatever they want to call it. They're basically roads and bridges is their idea, instead of infrastructure as a whole. It's kind of a silly discussion if you go to the, if you're not focused on the future of the planet and the country. You and I are going to be sitting here in our homes in San Francisco this week as it gets super hot. Especially with zero air conditioning in the East Bay, and it's going to be over the hundreds, right? And it's going to, in the Central Valley, it'll be even worse. But last week, roads were buckling in Minnesota because it was so hot for several days in a row. And I'm sure that Austin is soon going to be on its 100-degree, transformation over the summer. Yeah, right. Well, ERCOT and all that stuff is going mad again already. So. All these things are necessary and needed, and the climate change factor is not going to go away. And so stripping that out just to make something bipartisan seems a little silly. And it feels like, and I'm glad that progressive, senators spoke up and are like, hey, look, you guys, I understand you want to get something progressive done, but this is what we're trying to do in terms of passing a bill. So we're going to make sure that, if you try to put together this quote unquote bipartisan agreement, just because you're a bunch of centrists doesn't mean you're going to get all the Democrats on board, because then there's a block of progressives on the far left. Well, I don't think the senators are really that far left, honestly. Maybe in the House there are a couple, but on the left, you're not going to get them all to vote for something that's milquetoast. It's not gonna go forward, especially it doesn't have those climate provisions. So, all of these like factions trying to figure it out for everybody else isn't really helping very much. And the right side of everything, they're not helping either. And they didn't do anything when they had the House, the Senate, and the presidency either, which is quite hilarious in my thought, the way that I thought about it, because. A lot of when we talk about funding, a lot of their funding sources were actually a lot of like PPPs and all these other things that nobody actually really wants. People actually want funding. They don't want like a mechanism for them to spend more money. It's basically they want to give you a credit card and say, here, you go spend this and then pay us back. And no state or city that is going to be putting money into infrastructure wants to have all TIFIA funds. Because they have to pay it back later. And so they want new money to, that's going to be basically, a grant that's going to be, you don't have to pay it back. You're just going to get it. And then you're going to be able to invest in the country. That's what the investment is. It's not borrowing, it's investing.
And that's why there's $5.7 billion in earmarks in the Invest Act, because they want money.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking about the pay-fors, Susan Collins talked about this infrastructure bank revolving loan fund, and you brought up TIFIA. So I worked on both FAST and MAP 21 to change TIFIA and its companion program for the railroads, the RIF loan fund, that no one used because it was really difficult to figure out a mechanism to pay back those funds. I sat at FRA for a long time in many sessions trying to figure out how to reform both of those funding mechanisms. And in TIFIA, we at one point were able to add a TOD, transit-oriented development part of TIFIA, where you could use those for TOD. But the reason we couldn't use them, and I tried with many even transit agencies and state highway departments, is because we didn't have any way to pay them back. That's why they sat empty and were basically only used. TIFIA was only used by big highway projects that had some type of toll But even those projects still had a big chunk of them paid for with another grant, or I mean, and they might be favorable loans, but they're still loans.
Yeah.
So if it's just fake like that, it's not going to be used. It's certainly not going to be used for transit or active transportation.
Yeah. The only instance I can think of was LA Metro trying to speed up a couple, like the Crenshaw line or something like that, where they had the money,
sales
right?
Tax.
Measure R, right? So they had Measure R, and so they had that money into 2026 or into 2036, whichever one it is. I can't remember exactly when. It's far in the future. And then so they can build it faster without having to wait for the money to come in, right? So they can pay it back over time, which makes sense. But that's only if you pass the sales tax bill that you're going to pay for it yourself. It's not federal money. There's no extra money involved.
Yeah, they're not forgivable loans.
Right, exactly.
And then the other part is the unused COVID relief funds. You know, I just wonder how much of that is public transit. So actually, all of the transit agencies I'm working with right now, they received their first round of pandemic funds. Their second round, which is the CRISA funds, many of them have appropriated how to use those funds, but they haven't actually received them. So does that mean if they haven't received them, or some agencies haven't appropriated them, but they're figuring out how to use them? And in fact, one agency I'm working with, we were saying, well, we're going to get these CRISA funds. Let's figure out a way to add more service over the next few years. So because they haven't received them yet, would that be taking away those unallocated funds that transit agencies have already programmed, but just haven't received? I think that's what I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, and I think earlier on Twitter, I think that's what Beth Osborne was saying from T4, was that, some of that money that they're thinking about programming is some that goes to cities and then some that goes to transit agencies, which those transit agencies need that money. And it's also frustrating for some of these transit agencies where they're like, okay, well, let's put off spending this money until they're trying to, they're trying to spread it out like peanut butter over the next couple of years. And it's like, look, guys, you might get this taken away from you if you don't actually act on it. And like you were saying, they're programming it, but they're programming it for this long kind of tail where they think that they're going to have it for a couple of years, or at least they're going to bank it up so that so that they don't fall off a cliff in 2023 or whatever, which is good. But at the same time, the money, if it's still in the bank account, the feds might just be like, oh, that you haven't used that, you must not have needed it, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Which makes sense from if you're trying to spend money really quick, but if you're trying to be fiscally responsible over a long period of time, which they're trying to do, they don't look at it like that, which is unfortunate, but it's still money in that bank. It's
difficult because I mean, working with the agency boards, we have said we're getting X number of millions in from these CRISA funds. What's the best way to program them so we can ensure the long-term financial, sustainability for the agencies? And now, I mean, today, right before we were recording this, I was talking to one of my agencies and I said, we need to use this. We need to appropriate it. LA Metro wants to use their CRISA funds to do the fareless transit pilot. So so that's also flimsy funding.
The other flimsy funding seems to be the VMT stuff that now some conservatives are looking to do, or an index for the gas tax, and then now the Democrats are pushing back, which is crazy because the roles are reversed, but the Democrats are pushing back on that because it's going to be, going against Biden's $400,000 more or under, promise not to raise taxes. And I guess that's true. And I guess that, if he does it, then the Republicans and their message machine will go after him really hard if he does that. So I guess that's a line to draw in the sand, but it's really weird juxtaposition of where we were maybe 10 years ago, where if you said a VMT tax, the conservatives freaked out and the liberals were happy to talk about it. I mean, you could see this at the beginning of the administration when Pete, when Secretary Buttigieg basically, he floated it and then got shot down the next day. because progressive groups were upset about it. And so you have that as well, where you have this flipping. And then, you mentioned Senator Collins earlier. She also mentioned an EV tax of some sort, or a fee or registration or something that replaces the gas tax. And so, there's that as well. So there's all these weird machinations just because of politics and not because of the best, functioning, mechanism to actually pay for these things.
Yeah, if you, I can't believe I am thinking so differently about indexing the federal gas tax, because I worked on it for so long, figuring out how do we index it, how do we increase it. But when you think about how much it will actually bring in, and I don't know if I'm against indexing it. I think we need to find a new way to fund transportation, and that could be part of it. But rolling back, you could index it, and like you said, Biden will get really hit because it's a tax on consumers, especially middle income consumers. But the American Center for American Progress figured that you generate between 30 and 35 billion over a decade from indexing it. You could get the same revenue by rolling back the 2017 corporate tax cut by like a fraction of a percent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when you think about, like we were saying, Amazon, how much of the roads are, they're counting on infrastructure to deliver their goods, like all these companies that aren't paying any corporate taxes, and our transportation and infrastructure program is funded by the general fund. It's not really, more and more, it's not really funded by the gas tax. So, they're not paying into any of these investments. And like Biden, said he'll give up on the increasing the corporate tax from 25 to 28% if they agree to the 15% minimum corporate tax. That would really get to the companies that aren't paying, because most of your mom and pop small business companies are paying corporate income taxes.
Yeah.
It's the big multinational companies that aren't,
right.
Which I think most Americans can comprehend, get that, and would support it.
And they do support it. That's the thing, is all the polling and stuff shows that they support it, but the tax aversion from the conservative side is so much that that it gets shot down immediately when everybody, even many in their party, love it. The idea of giving a flat tax. And Amazon does pay taxes. They pay property taxes, I'm sure, for some of their things. They pay gas taxes for their vehicles, but then their vehicles drive on local roads, which are paid for with property taxes, which they are going to be in a warehouse, like maybe outside the city's, outside the city limits or something like that. So there's
they often get tax incentives.
And they often get, exactly.
Yeah.
Just like, the HQ2, which, did you read that piece about them not liking Eagles fans? So
yes.
They didn't pick Philadelphia because it's so petty. All of it is so petty, and it's so.
That's why those decisions are made by it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's not like a ranking system, and there's no like scoring system or anything. It's just like, hey, I don't like Eagles fans. They're mean, and they threw snowballs at Santa or whatever.
Fans.
Yeah. I don't have a thing or against or for Eagles fans, aside from, the Goldbergs is a funny television show, and they have the dad's an Eagles fan. But, aside from that, it's just funny how they make these decisions. Sherrod Brown, a Democrat from Ohio, had this to say. He said they'd rather increase payments for the $60,000 a year person by the gas tax than for $300 million per year person raise on the income tax. Which, that's basically what it is. Like they would rather, give the lower income folks a smaller tax than give the people that make a ton of money that can afford to like lose, maybe $1 million here or there. $300 million is a lot of money. Nobody needs that amount of money. And it's just, that's the juxtaposition that they're talking about.
And I think the framing around, this is a jobs plan. This is an infrastructure program that will benefit business. They should pay for some of it. And I don't know. I think once Biden is back from Europe, it sounds like whatever's going to happen with this plan by the Gang of 10, we'll know this week. I don't think there's any language yet, but it seems like we'll know this week what it is. Biden will be back, and then I mean, do you think after everything he saw that had gone on during the Obama administration, he's going to just let this play out and wait around? I think at some point, I mean, that's why he ended talks with Capito, because it was going nowhere.
Yeah, and people thought that lasted longer than it should, but he cut it off after a week instead of a year, which is the healthcare stuff for Obama. They were like, famously in Obama's most recent book, he said, he asked one of the senators, I can't remember, maybe it was Barrasso or somebody, if they were going to support it, if they were ever going to support it, and they said no. And it's like, well, you just wasted a year of my time. And also, we watered down the healthcare bill for all that too, because people kept putting in amendments and they're like, oh, well, maybe I'd vote for it if you put this in there, or maybe I'd vote for it if you put this in there.
Yeah,
exactly. And then and then they didn't vote for it. So I don't understand why we can't do, first off, getting rid of the filibuster and passing some really important stuff. McConnell's going to go scorched earth if he gets back to Senate anyway, so why not do the same back to him? But doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, I think Biden, I think he understands that, but he also he's in a tough situation because there's people in the Senate who seem to have more power than him because he lets them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's what I was going to say is he's stuck because Joe Manchin said he's trying to get this bipartisanship, but this could just be a show. I mean, he's doing everything he can right now to make this bipartisan. He's showing Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, we're trying to be bipartisan.
Well, and Schumer has set it up through the summer for them to vote on all these bills, and whether they pass them or not, they're all going to just get shot down. And so it's like, hey, look, none of your friends on the other side of the aisle are doing anything to lift a finger to help any of this stuff go through. So what do you say?
I mean, he can show he's exhausting this effort, and he knows that his window is closing. Right. So
I hope so. Anyways, politics. It's all bonkers. It is bonkers. I mean, I was actually just thinking too, like, if you want to connect infrastructure spending to these companies individually, you could, if you're going to do universal broadband for everybody, you could call it the Amazon broadband or something, the Apple and Amazon tax for broadband or something. I know that there's a lot of smart people in the White House in the messaging department there thinking about these things, but there's got to be a way to connect those dots because, if you give everybody, and I go back to to Lyndon B. Johnson and some of the Robert Caro books about, Master of the Senate and all that stuff. And one of the things that people, loved about Johnson was turn the lights on. He brought the lights. And so all of these people became, Democrats for a long time because he brought the electricity to these rural areas. And so there's something to be said for bringing internet to all these places and saying that you are the one that did it. So I think that there's some benefit in that, and the roads and the health and care, all those things. And they are infrastructure, I must say.
And I think this wouldn't even be a conversation if there were two more Democratic senators. We wouldn't have. There is this discussion on, Joe Manchin's talking for other Democratic senators. He's just the one out there that wants this bipartisanship. But, if North Carolina, like we were talking about, Maine, this whole discussion would be, we'd be having a different discussion. So, yeah.
But we got to dance with who brung us.
Yeah, that's what we're working with.
For closing, we've gone through all of the details that I've had on my notes and stuff. But for closing, I think, for me, and I've said this before, I just want to get people to where they want to go. And I think that we also want climate solutions. I want people to get places. And, I don't think we just want new roads. I think we want smarter roads. I think we want fixed roads. And I think we want more intelligent infrastructure. So hopefully we can get there. And I think that, hopefully we pull a miracle off like they did kind of with the healthcare bill. I remember when the healthcare bill passed, we were like all amazed because it got to 60 votes, and everybody's like, "Holy crap, they actually got done." And hopefully we can as a country, we can pull this off too. I'm not saying we from a political party standpoint. I'm just saying like we need this generally. Like we need to invest in our country, and these investments are going to be really important. I think not just physical infrastructure, but care infrastructure and the internet and all that stuff. So that's just kind of what are your final kind of thoughts on this generally, Chrissy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Like this is something when we're there at the G7 this week talking about China's Belt and Road Initiative and how we want to have an initiative from the G7 for the rest of the world. How can we go out to the world and say we want to help you rebuild or build, and we can't even figure out here at home how to build smarter infrastructure? I mean, everything, it's not just about roads and bridges. It's about really like upping our game and making this about the economy. And I mean, it's frustrating, but I think in the end, I still am positive that something could get done. Just thinking about, exhausting this bipartisan effort. If Joe Manchin has shown he's votes for economic bills, more than the social issues. He's more democratic on economic bills. So I'm still hopeful. I mean, I'm glad at least this conversation is happening.
We could be stuck talking about PPPs and $1 trillion of made up money.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's frustrating.
We'll get there. Hopefully we'll get there. I'm going to stay positive. We'll try to stay positive. Well, I'd also like to hear more from folks about what you all want to hear about, what topics you want to hear about. Feel free to email theoverheadwire@gmail.com and let us know what you're thinking or what you're thinking is important. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this bill if you want to give us your opinions, and we'll read them out on the show maybe next time we come back. So let us know, theoverheadwire@gmail.com. So this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you. So I really, really want to thank you all. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We have $2 a month and you'll get some a handwritten note and some stickers. $10 a month and you'll get the Bus Only scarf. And also, if you are a member at $1 a month or more, you'll get access to our bonus features on Patreon, which includes now 3 extras from some of the podcasts we've done with Laura Schul, with Carol Martins. So go check that out if you get a chance, and if you're a member of Patreon, we appreciate it. Everybody supporting the show keeps us going and allows us to pay our interns to do our editing and all that stuff. So appreciate that. Chrissy, where can folk? Oh, actually, we should do Puppies and Butterflies. I totally forgot. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. Chrissy, do you have a Puppies and Butterflies?
Well, speaking of Talking Headways, I have. So, have you seen the David Byrne American Utopia show yet?
No, I haven't.
So David Byrne, former Talking Heads, and solo,
and cyclist in New York.
Yes, he's given a lot of money away for cycling. He had a Broadway show called American Utopia. I didn't see it. It was right before COVID, so I didn't see it on Broadway. But then HBO, it was on HBO, and I watched it during maybe when COVID. I think it came out like 6 months ago, and it's just so cool and fun. And you will dance in your living room, and I watch it. My husband and I have been just turning it on pretty often. You just have to check it out.
I'm writing it down.
It's directed by
now.
Spike Lee. Yeah.
I'm writing it down.
It's basically him and his band, and they're all playing music, and you'll recognize a lot of the songs. I mean, they're either his solo songs or Talking Head songs. And it's fascinating to watch them dance and the way they program it and sing. And it's like, it's supposed to be a utopian event. So
that's awesome. I'll have to check that out. My Puppies and Butterflies is actually puppies. Last night they had the finals of the Westminster Kennel Club dog show north of New York, and I was disappointed that the Pekingese won. I really like the Samoyed and the sheepdog, but I always love the dog shows. Actually, so Nancy asked me what type of dog was Bob.
Bob is your regular street mutt. Yeah, Bob is what we call. He was found on the streets of LA, brought up to San Francisco or else he would have been in a kill shelter.
Yikes.
Yeah. So yeah, he's your regular 10-pound sort of terrier mix.
Lots of terriers, probably.
On the street, lots of terriers. Yeah. Little black dog with gray paws.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard Bob, but I don't know if I've ever actually seen Bob.
Bob, come here. Oh, he's sleeping. I'll get him over here. But I saw the Pekingese, and I'm like, what? This dog looks crazy.
It's a big ball of fluff. That's all it is a big ball of fluff.
I know.
I don't know how you can judge that dog because it's just, I mean, I guess you have to go on the fluff, but, the Samoyed was a beautiful dog. It was bright white and just a really happy, obviously they're happy dogs because they have, they're bred to, it keeps the ice from forming on their lips. But the English sheepdog, I like that too. It's just a big fluff ball as well, but more like a 150-pound fluff ball instead of like a 5-pound fluff ball. So,
yeah. I'm sorry. Bob is waking up from his slumber.
That's okay.
I'll post a picture of him on Twitter.
Okay, cool. Well, Chrissy, where can folks find you online?
You can find me at, here it is. Woo.
Hey, Bob. Bob.
Yeah.
Bob. Hey, Bob. He's like, I hear the voice, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. You can find me at Nancy Me Chrissy on Twitter or at mycuriouscity.com.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at TheOverheadWire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thanks to Chrissy for coming on the show. And we'll see you next time.
Have a great week.
Talk